All right, guys. As I suspected, not much of a turnout today. I know there's a lot of weather and internet issues going on. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Today's review will be a little different. You guys all know you have your note-taking assignment this week. So I won't actually cover any content from the chapter in this review because I don't want you guys to just take notes on the review and then turn those in for your chapter notes. We really want to see how you guys are reading the content from the book, internalizing that content, and taking notes on the chapter itself. So I will go over some important topics that you guys need to look at or keep in mind for your chapter assignment, but we won't go too deep into any content so that we can see what kind of notes you guys are taking from the chapters. So we are doing the first half of chapter 18 this week, which covers some of progressivism, this sort of transition from the populist movement beginning to have more and more impact and influence on American political dynamics. And you guys will read up through the first half of chapter 18, which ends at the Voices of Freedom section, which is on 710. You'll take notes on 691 through 710, that whole section up to the Voices of Freedom section. Make sure you guys turn in those notes by Friday at 5 p.m. And make sure you guys follow directions on the subject line. Include your name, the assignment, and the CRN that you're in. I'm teaching several different CRNs, so that'll help. Also, keep in mind if you're supposed to send it to a TA, make sure you do that. That's basically based on what CRN you're in. So make sure you guys follow directions. Really stupid reason to lose points on your notes assignment if you don't include all that information in your subject line. I have also included let me share my screen with y'all, a little tutorial or a little, I guess, lecture, I'm not sure what you would call it, but a little tutorial on note-taking that gives a few different, or goes over a few different note-taking styles. It's here on the left under note-taking tips. And basically this is a little presentation on what is called active learning and note-taking. Goes through a few different note-taking styles or formats that you can use, or different systems you can use for note-taking. Keep in mind, you don't have to use any particular note-taking format, mind mapping or outline format or Cornell notes or anything like that. In particular, just make sure your notes are well organized and make sure that you're commenting on each subtopic in the chapter. So you'll see our chapter begins the progressive era. It's got a good intro on the progressive era. And then the first subheading is an urban age and a consumer society. And then there's several subtopics under that subheading: farms and cities, muckrakers, immigration as a global process, immigrant quest for freedom, et cetera, et cetera. So just make sure you guys are touching on each of those subheadings and subtopics. That's a good way to organize your notes. So to get full credit, you'll need to touch on each of those and make sure you have notes on each important topic and theme and subheading in the chapter up to the Voices of Freedom. Any questions on the note-taking assignment?
Makes sense to me, Professor.
Okay, sounds good, Isaac. Meg, what was your question?
It makes sense to me too. I was just wondering if you know if this book is available as an audiobook, because sometimes that can make it like a little bit, I don't know, it can be sometimes easier to take notes while listening to versus reading something. So I'm wondering if you happen to know that off the top of your head.
I don't know that actually. I would assume you can find an audio version somewhere. I've never used an audio version, or I've never had a student use an audio version.
Okay.
If you do find one, shoot me an email and let me know so that I can let the class know.
Yeah, I will. I just know that like everyone learns differently, you know, and some
Yeah.
people learn a little bit better listening to things versus reading them. So
Yeah,
thank you.
I wonder if CAS would have a version of that, the Center for Accommodations and Student Support. But yeah, let me know if you find one.
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so just to give you guys a hint as to what things you'll need to look at, what topics you'll need to look at for your chapter assignment. Make sure you guys understand the economic dynamics, the country's economic dynamics coming out of the Gilded Age. We talked about this stratification of wealth, this income inequality. Make sure you guys understand that. Make sure you understand its impact on labor, its impact on the economy in a broader sense, how wealth is divided and allocated, how it impacted the growth of monopolies and trusts, and also how that's starting to influence political dynamics and these new political parties, progressives and populists. Make sure you guys understand who the muckrakers were, how the muckraking movement is in many ways sort of a response to yellow journalism. Remember, we talked about yellow journalism last week as this sort of sensationalized account of events. This sort of heightened, sensationalized patriotism is often tied to these yellow journalist accounts or stories. And then muckraking is in many ways sort of a response to this. It's sort of a return to journalistic integrity. And muckrakers really use the media, print media, and journalism to try to combat certain social or economic problems in the country. Make sure you guys understand the rise of the urban city. We continue this urbanization process after the Second Industrial Revolution. We're really into the 1890s here, looking at the turn of the 20th century. We've already talked about sort of our imperial tactics and our geopolitical agenda last week, and we're going to be focusing on a lot more domestic issues this week. Farms and cities, immigration and global as a global process. Look at this concept of nativism, how nativism has really infiltrated American politics by the turn of the 20th century, the impact of nativism on sort of discrediting or trying to criticize these new political movements. And then freedom, this concept of liberties and freedoms and who should be involved or the government's role in providing economic freedoms to American citizens is a very important aspect of progressivism in general. This idea that the government should be responsible for providing economic freedoms to Americans. Really, the 19th century is about political agency. You know, we fight a civil war to define citizenship in the 19th century. Then a lot of political processes after the Civil War are about defining liberties and defining citizenship rights and enfranchisement and political agencies. Well, we really start to see that shift in the 20th century, and we start to see politicians and progressives demand that the government provide economic freedoms, economic liberties to American citizens. So make sure you understand that process. Most of these progressives believe that the government should be directly involved with providing economic freedom, meaning providing access to consumer markets, providing what is now referred to as an American standard of living. This idea that intrinsic to your citizenship rights is this idea that you should have access to upward social mobility, you should have economic freedoms, you should have access to consumer markets, you should have the ability to buy consumer products, and that this is somehow tied to Americans' concept of freedoms. We'll talk about that again next week when we get into progressive presidents. But make sure you understand these concepts of American standards of living, access to consumerism, industrial and economic freedoms, and how that's tied to the platform of populists and progressives. Make sure you understand the impact of socialism in American society. This section on the varieties of progressives is very interesting. This early progressive movement, we start to see politicians challenging the classic definitions of liberty, classic definitions of unalienable rights, classic definitions of liberalism and conservatism. And so these different varieties of progressivism are really going to turn into different or various political platforms and even political parties. Keep in mind the sort of base for all of these political for these progressive and populist movements, and how their platforms appeal to the working class, the farming class, the industrial class of America. So keep that in mind when you're considering these new platforms of progressives that challenge the government to provide freedoms for Americans that weren't traditionally defined in the government's roles of the 19th century, and how those are changing into the 20th century. Socialism is very important in this process. Make sure that you understand the appeals of socialism. I won't get too deep into it, but look into Eugene Debs, look into his sort of agenda or the way that he presents socialism to the American workers. Look into the IWW and the American Federation of Labor, the AFL. Make sure you understand why these socialist tendencies are appealing to the working class. You know, really consider the conditions the working class were subjected to during the Gilded Age, this stratification of wealth. We've talked about these horrible industrial accidents that continuously happen, lack of protection, lack of regulation protecting the American worker, and how that led millions to become interested in a new political platform based on socialism and based on increased responsibilities of the government to its citizens. Labor and civil liberties is an important section in that respect. So make sure you understand the influence of socialism, why it was seen as, or why it was appealing to certain social classes. Make sure you take into consideration the economic, labor, and social conditions of the Gilded Age, how that influenced the populist and progressive movement, and now how that's influencing these new progressives and their platforms at the beginning of the 20th century. So it's a pretty short section, only 15 pages or so. Those are some ideas of what you need to make sure you understand before you take your quiz. Make sure you guys have your notes submitted by Friday at 5. And then your source assignment this week is on the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, which is a very tragic story. I will warn you guys, it's a pretty disturbing, semi-graphic video about the story of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, a tragedy that happened in New York during the Progressive Era. So that will also really apply to this idea of government regulations and a government's responsibility to provide a safe working environment and to combat these sort of laissez-faire economic practices, which have led a lot of industrialists, a lot of capitalists to provide unsafe working conditions to bring their bottom line down. So that's all I got for today. I'm open to any questions you guys might have. But like I said, I don't really want to get too deep into specific content because I want to see how well you guys are taking notes on the chapter. Any questions for me?
Is there like a length limit for the notes?
Nope, no length limit. As long as you touch on each of the major topics of the first half of the chapter, each of the subheadings and subtopics, As long as it's well organized, you should get full credit.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. No questions for me. I know I already turned in my notes. I might review them and see if I touched on everything again because I thought I did, but
Okay.
I'll double back. on
Did I
that.
shoot you an
Thank
email saying that I got him? Or did
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool.
I
Yeah.
sent them and like just want to make sure. I'm like, I think I followed everything. Made put the did my name, did the CRN, and I'm like, I think this is right. Just
Okay. Well, feel free to
I
send
have
them again if you want to take more thorough notes. I'll just grade the second one.
okay. Thank you. I'll take a look. I appreciate it.
No problem. Anything else, guys?
I just wanted to clarify one last thing about the notes. Did you want us to put headers for each of the sections or just make sure that we touch on the sections?
Like you said, like I said, it's up to you how you want to organize it. You know, some people use mind map and these crazy note formats. So I don't require any headings or footers or anything like that. It's just really based on how you want to organize it.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Sure. All right, guys. Anything else? All right, since we didn't get to go over, or we're not going to go over content this week, feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions about the chapter as you're reading it through. I've had a lot of good individual Zoom meetings this week, so I'm happy to set up a meeting if you guys want to talk.
Thank you so much, Professor.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good week. We'll see you next week.
Okay, bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Oh, mister, I'm so sorry because I was in another class.
Okay.
Sorry. Is the meeting over?
It is, yeah. So go ahead and watch the recording. It's basically just about procedures for the week and everything. I talk about your notes, but we didn't get too into content because I want to see how well you're taking notes on the chapter.
Oh, okay.
All right, so go ahead and watch the recording. If you have any questions or anything, shoot me an email.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
Have a great day.